came into the room and she's like, look at my phone. And then I couldn't see it, so I had to look at mine. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, it's going to be a good game, but I can't bet against Tom Brady. I have the Bucs winning 31-27 and Tom Brady going to his 10th championship.
Aaron Rodgers and his people were like, they listened to our episode and they said, hold our cheesehead or coat.
Donovan Mitchell, who right now looks to be a superstar.
Just amazing. And I don't care what the Red Sox got for trading Mookie Betts and David Price. The Dodgers, in my opinion, win it. I don't have to see what players they gave up.
Yeah, that's not just the Chiefs. That's Andy Reid. He knows the defenses so well because he's such a great offensive mind. That
well, you said you can't bet against Tom Brady, and as a Cowboys fan and what I just did last weekend, I am not gonna bet against Aaron Rodgers.
It was a great series. Game 4 was one of the best games I've ever watched in my entire life.
Just goes to show the offense for the Dallas Stars could not keep up, and when the defense needed to step up, the Lightning's offense just overpowered them.
Chris Paul is one of the most underrated players of all time. He's been the best player wherever he goes, and that includes with the Rockets. Yeah, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl. I mean, that's all I can really say. There's 2 of the top 5 players in the league, and they are very, very good.
Yeah, and I really think the Clippers' chance to win the championship was last year, and they were up 3-1 against the Denver Nuggets.
Hello, I'm Taylor Hearn, and you listen to The Outsiders' Opinions with Kevin and Austin.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to our MLB Opinions of the Week. This is part 3 of Fixing Baseball. So part 1, we addressed the problems we saw with baseball. Number 2, we discussed solutions that everyone has mentioned. Now, part 3 is our solutions. So we'll start with Austin. We'll go one by one. Austin has his rules that he would like to implement, and I have my rules. We might share. We also might disagree. So this is what part 3 is about. Austin, I'll let you go with your, just name one off your list. This list is not ordered.
Yeah, and just to clarify, this isn't a combined list, like Kevin said. We did not also talk to each other during it. So if we have the exact same, we'll just say so. But I'm going to start with my one that is in regards to the minor leagues. Increase minimum salaries in the minors to a livable wage. It's already been done a little bit, but I need to see it increased a little bit more because these players are not playing the entire year, and if they get hurt or if they're not playing all that much, they're not going to get any incentives, and that can really hurt. And a player that's very promising can just sometimes retire out of the blue because they cannot afford to stay in the minor leagues, which really is a travesty.
Yeah, that's a nice rule. I didn't think of that, but that's a nice rule. The one I've written first was cap floor. We've discussed it. I like a cap floor. I think it helps tanking. You have to pay someone. So, if you're just going to pay someone, go make sure you do it right and get a good player, no matter the money, because you have to fill that money. So anyone can get it, or you can try to sign any player. Because you have to fill a certain amount. And we've talked about it before. I wasn't thinking of an exact number, but I think it shouldn't be set in stone for like the rest of eternity. I think it should be kind of how the cap kind of adjusts in the NFL. I think the cap floor should adjust in the MLB. So that's like my first thing. What's your second one?
Yeah, this wasn't going to be my second one, but because you mentioned it, cap floor, you and I both talked about this in our previous episode. We both agreed during that when other people had mentioned a cap floor. I thought around 50 to 58, 60 million around there as a cap floor. Probably 50 is where I would want it. But yeah, it wasn't going to be next on the list, but I feel like I don't want to mention it down the line. You just mentioned it, and I agree.
Okay. Now, my second one, I don't know if you have this one. We talked about it. So I thought universal DH, and then I thought we talked about something last episode, and it's universal DH, but the DH is designated to a pitcher. So you have a starting pitcher, let's just say Clayton Kershaw, and I'll stay with Kershaw with the Dodgers. Gavin Lux is the DH with Kershaw. But once you pull Kershaw, Gavin Lux is no longer the DH. You have to put another hitter. So I think this keeps the strategy of when you take a pitcher and you put a hitter in. We mostly see this in the NL, but I think it'd be great to keep the strategy of the game, but you also have better hitters. So I thought about that's my second rule that I would like to implement in my league in the MLB.
Yeah, I didn't write that one down, but that is something I agreed with. My next one is increase player rosters to 28 players. Right now it's set at 26. Most teams hold less than that. I think 28 is enough, especially if you're going to have a change where a DH must be pulled with a pitcher. I feel like you're going to need more players on your roster. In the playoffs, it is a 40-man roster and everyone can play. I mean, it's a 26-man roster, but you can have all the guys on your 40-man play in the playoffs, which really allows between series for you to switch up who's playing, who's not playing. I feel like 28 will allow for more continuity between games. You won't have to call someone up, hey, we need a lefty batter for this game, so I'm going to call this one guy down up. And there's already three. You can only call down a guy and then call him back up 3 times before he gets put on waivers. And I feel like if you increase it to 28, there'll be less guys put on waivers, and maybe they give those guys more money eventually because they've proven themselves with 2 extra roster spots.
Yeah, I didn't have that on my list, but with one of my rules, you would have to increase roster size if you want to have that many hitters, which opens up more jobs. As I think that's been an argument for universal DH, but it's also been an argument against how it might take away jobs with like pitchers who want to hit. But now my third one is adjust draft order. So I, with my rules, I really focused on just like dismantling tanking because tanking is a way to get a good team with the rules that are set now. And I want to change the rules so tanking is no longer a thing because I believe tanking takes away, it doesn't help attract fans. If you have a good team, you're going to get attracted more to baseball, in my opinion. And when you have a tanking team, a team that just stinks, revenue's low and no one really cares because the team stinks and you don't get introduced to baseball. So adjusting the draft order to where it's almost like a lottery and you get the right player, no matter where you end up, you can still have a chance at the number one seed, but you kind of increase it, but just a little to where it's not, oh, if I'm bad, I'll get a number one. It's really random. So that's my thing with the draft order.
Yeah. That's one I've always been a little on the fence about. Something you could do, and this isn't on my list, I'm just saying, is maybe you add up over your last 5 seasons who has the worst record and that be the lottery order. So if a team's actually struggling, instead of just wasting 5 years, a team's actually struggling. So the last 5 years really matters. But again, some team can really become really bad fast after a free agent leaves. That's been one I've been on the fence about. But for my next one, this one is in regards to the playoffs. Allow for 2 challenges a game in the playoffs per each team. This allows for no missed calls. I've seen a lot of missed calls, whether it be uh, strike zone, which is going to be one of my future ones, or umpire mistakes on out, safe, and the team really can't challenge it because they are out of challenges. And even on reviews, they do not review everything unless it's a run score. Unless they scored a run, you can't really challenge anything without using a challenge. So I feel like in the playoffs, especially, and this is only for playoffs, you add another challenge to both teams so that the game is not decided on a play that could not be reviewed.
That's a solid rule. I didn't come up with that rule on my list, but after you explained it, that's a pretty solid rule in my opinion. Now, my fourth one is larger bases. I was first introduced to this idea when we were doing the last part two, and I really like the idea of it. You have a bigger base, so it's easier to steal, and I think if you have more bases stolen, that adds more excitement and base running. We haven't seen a lot of good base runners, but if you have larger bases and it's easier for players to steal, then maybe they'll actually work on base running because people on bases really hasn't been a thought for a lot of teams because they just kind of want to hit the home run or they strike out. So adding more intricate stuff to baseball, which I think is great about baseball, is stealing bases and the strategy that you can use with stealing bases. So that's my fourth rule.
Yeah, that's one I've always been on the fence about, as you know. I don't really know whether or not I want that, but it depends on how big the bases become, and obviously there's a lot of nitty gritty with that type of stuff. You don't really know until you talk to the players, talk to the owners, and become acquainted with both of their opinions and see where a middle ground is. I'd be okay with that if it was a small change, but I don't know what the change would be, and it really depends on my. That really would change my opinion based on how big the change would be.
Yeah, mine wouldn't be like too big, probably like maybe an inch, just to where it's a little bit more, but not like way too much. So it's still relatively rare. Well, it's not too rare, but it's possible because it's just a little bit bigger.
Hmm.
So that's why I was thinking about it.
My second to last one, I've already hinted at it before. Computer Strike Zone. Um, I've watched many games where there is a strike called that is so far a ball. I don't know how it is a call like that. Umpires make mistakes; they're human, and I'm fine with those mistakes in the field of play. But when it's a strikeout, that can really change everything. You can review everything right now, basically, besides strikeouts and some other plays that are small. But the strike zone can really change how a batter takes every pitch. A 1-1 count can change to an 0-2 count based on one call, and that'll really change. Okay, now I can't swing for the fences. I gotta shorten my swing and try to get on base, and that can really affect the game very much so at the very end. So I believe a computer strike zone is necessary, especially in this day and age where we get to see the pitches live while watching TV and we know whether it's a strike or ball, but then the ump tells us something different when it's obviously not true.
Yeah, I that is not on my list. I just didn't think about it. To me, I think refs, there's always controversy. While you do make a good point, I don't know if I want to do computerized strike zone. I don't know. I freak out about technology, and just having technology would, in that way, kind of freaks me out. I just am not. I'm not totally for strikeouts, but I see the point in it. And to me, with umps and refs in general, there's always going to be a missed call. While that is not, we should do everything to prevent that. I just didn't think of computerized strike zone. So that was just my thought in why I don't have it on my list. But I can, but we can move on into my next one. I'm just going to combine the two. It's decreasing service time and arbitration. So I implemented this rule because I really want to have free agents hit the market when they're 25 or 26, um, or relatively young instead of when they're 28, 29. I want to have the ability for teams to be able to build more through free agency than you can really now, because you're betting on players' ages, and if they're 30, you're expecting them to decline. So they may not get as much money, and you're not willing to spend as much. So that's why, and then they'd have shorter deals, in my opinion, so they get another big contract, so you can make more money now, is what I'm thinking with decreasing service time and arbitration.
Yeah, I have one very similar to that, but I disagree with shortening it. I would keep it the same length, but start the timer when they're drafted by a team. That's when I would start the timer so that I know, hey, if this guy's drafted late, it's not based on just how long he was on the team in the majors. It's how long he's been on a major league team or one of their affiliates. It doesn't not necessarily on the higher ups like a team. I mean, a player could go to arbitration when they're 38 just because of how long they were in the minors. But I wouldn't shorten service time per se because I believe if they shorten it too much, we're going to have guys who are freaks of nature like Juan Soto, who started when they were 19, become free agents when they're 22, and then the Nationals can't pay them. So it just I wouldn't shorten it, but I would start it when they're drafted. Whenever they're drafted and sign that draft, uh, that note that they were drafted, sign the contract. That starts their timer right then, and the timer will stay the same length so that their ability to go to a new team younger will still happen. But if you get to the major leagues it doesn't help you.
So that does make sense. The thing that I'm on the fence about with that rule is, what if it just takes this player 4 or 5 years to really develop? Like, he needs to be in the minors for so long. I'm afraid a team will try to bring him up because he's younger and they have that clock ticking, that he could get injured and they just rush him up
Well,
instead
I
of
mean, it's
giving
still
him the time
baseball
he
is
needs.
baseball. Injuries are going to happen whether you're playing at the majors or not. And I mean, that gives it. Well, that also gives the opportunity for a player to prove himself to get even more money if his clock's about to run out, anyways. So, I feel like starting the timer early is the easiest way, because if you shorten the timers for everybody when they get to the major leagues, you're just gonna have a lot of trades. You're not gonna have a lot of free agency moves because you're just gonna trade them away to get prospects. Because then, okay, now we have 18 prospects and none of their timers have started because they're all never been in the MLB, and we traded away those good players that were about to run out of contract, about or run out of service time. So it just allows for a lot more trades than necessarily free agency, when they're probably just going to sign an extension with that really, really good team they were traded to anyway.
To me, I have another rule. Maybe I'll just bring that up. Is, like you mentioned Juan Soto, I have a rule of, it's creating um like a it's the bird rights in the NBA, but something similar to that, where staying with your team give is with the team that drafted you, it's more beneficial for you money wise, because this team is the only one that can pay the most money. So even if a team offers you the best, uh, a 300 contract, the Nationals in Juan Soto's case could offer him like 350, 375, and the league has a way to where no matter where you were drafted, those bird rights can be covered, maybe with a luxury tax. Like, you have to pay extra, and that extra money that you had to spend for a luxury tax team goes to a team like the Nationals, and then they can afford their star. But they are not taxed for that contract because he's a homegrown player.
That's
If
but if
his
you're doing it
contract,
like the NBA, the NBA, let's just use Jalen Brunson for a simple example. If Jalen Brunson's traded tomorrow to the Milwaukee Bucks, just saying random teams for randomness, they now have his bird rights. So I think my point still remains. They are going to trade the players because now they would have those bird rights, and a team like the Dodgers could actually afford those players.
but to me, a thing that goes into a trade is service time. And if that player is less service time,
They're more likely
he
to be
cannot be
traded.
as attractive.
They
No,
would
but
be
he's
more.
not as, you may not get as much
But my point is,
back
with the bird
from the team
rights,
because they have less service time.
you would though, because you have their bird rights. They would be
Then
worth
you
a lot.
make it where the bird rights can't be traded.
Well, that's nothing like the NBA. That'd be an interesting move. I don't
Well, yeah,
know.
I was saying it's a similar thing, and my basis is of the NBA, but the NBA's bird rights still has its problems. But I take something like that to where the luxury tax for other teams is used to spend more money for teams like the Rays, who can't spend money, and
I don't know if it's the
therefore
Rays
they can
can or the
cover it.
Rays don't, but
But other teams that quote unquote say they don't have the money, the MLB would make sure they have the money for teams that go over the luxury tax. The money that they spend and are taxed by, that can go to other teams to cover the bird rights, and the bird rights can't be traded because it's trying to incentivize homegrown players staying with their homegrown teams and not trading them just for a bunch of prospects and tanking. So I did two rules because I just wanted to. You mentioned something, and that's why I had this other rule. So you can say two.
I only have one more. But that's very interesting. I have to think, because then almost no one would be traded, because then the team that gave them away would have the incentive of still having the bird rights, and they could trade them away for a year and then get them back on their bird rights. That would be very.
No, to me, if you trade that player away, the bird rights go away. That the bird rights stay with the player as long as he's a part of your team. Once he leaves, the bird rights go away
So
from him.
just because a team trades a player, that player is now not allowed to get the same amount of money as if he was stayed with the same amount of team, because that's the issue. That's why the NBA
Yes,
still has the bird rights, is because a player doesn't always decide if they're traded. He can just be traded out of the blue, and now that player is not going to be afforded the same amount of money if he gets a max deal.
he can get a max deal with his team.
But my point is, if the
But
team decides, hey, we don't want you anymore, now if that player becomes insane for a different team, he cannot get a supermax, which is the bird right deal. That's what a supermax is in the NBA. It's just the bird right. You can pay more to this one player because because you have his bird rights. But the player would just lose their bird rights if he was traded ever in his career.
yes,
Well, then that's
that's
very
the working
unfortunate
theory.
for a very young player if he was traded young and then now can't get his bird
The
rights
bird
just because.
rights would be, I know this is going to sound very bad. It's 25 extra million. And let's say he gets a 300 million deal and he doesn't get a 325 million deal. I think the player should be fine. In my perspective, 325 extra million versus 300 million, there's not a huge drop off.
Man, they're playing for that generational wealth, though. I don't know. It's an interesting move.
I'm pretty sure 300 and 325 million generational still affects them. It affects them the same way. You still get a very luxurious life. But that's my perspective.
Well, I mean, they don't get all of the 325 million versus 300. There's obviously a lot of stuff that goes into that. But yeah, it's that's a very interesting one. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it. I'd have to think because that one's just it's not bad. It's just weird. I don't
Oh
know. I'd
yeah.
have to think about it.
And
It's
it can
new.
be
It's new.
fixed, but this is the basis. You create incentives for a homegrown team.
But my point
One
is, what
could
if the
get the
team
bird
doesn't
rights.
want him? It's not always the player who asks to leave. That's my point.
Teams only, in my opinion, only get rid of their players because they think they try to capitalize on value and they're trying to extend their window. But I want them to keep their homegrown players.
Well, I mean, that's just interesting. It's just interesting. David Ortiz may have stayed on the Minnesota Twins. He may never play for the Boston Red Sox. I mean, there's a lot of things a lot of benefits to some of the stuff that you're talking against. But I mean, there's some benefits to what you're saying. I just have to think about it. I'm not going to make an opinion on it right now. I just have to think because it's not bad. It's just weird. And weird doesn't mean bad. It just means I have to think about it. I've never heard of it before, so my mind needs to digest uh, the opinion. But my
It's all
last
good.
one is probably, in my opinion, the most important one, and it's to expand to more TV networks. ESPN really has all of the rights, and not everyone is the biggest fan of ESPN, and not everyone has ESPN. I think if they could get some more highly marketed games on big Fox, CBS, on big news channels, like a couple games a year, maybe 10, maybe one game for each team a year, would allow for more exposure to the game to younger people who've never seen the game before, maybe some older people who've never seen the game before. I just find the game hard to watch. I have MLB TV. I'm so thankful that I do, but not everyone has that right. And if I didn't, I would not be able to watch many Yankee games all year. There's only like 6 or 7 that are on ESPN, and if you're on a worser team than the Yankees, I mean, I'm a Yankees fan, so I even have it much better than most teams out there. But if I was a Marlins fan, there may be 2 games a year that are on ESPN. It just I feel like the game needs to be more accessible, and that is like that's why I think the NFL is still one of the most premier sports in the U.S. Obviously, on Sundays you're gonna get 4 games, and that's guaranteed, and that allows every week for you to see maybe not your favorite team, but see the game. And if the MLB once a week could just get a team on a major news site, Fox, CBS, any one of those, NBC, I feel like it'll really allow for the game to grow to younger audiences and audiences that have really never looked at baseball because not everyone is into ESPN and not everyone has ESPN.
So that's a good rule. Um, the thing is, with other news networks, I'm pretty sure ESPN has the rights
Yeah, I
to
know.
most baseball games
Hmm.
because they paid the most.
Yeah, I understand. That's my
So
point is that need to stop worrying about the money in the short term because they're going to gain more fans if they just have exposure. But they have no exposure because not everyone has ESPN. And if you're and ESPN is expensive. Not everyone's going to want to pay for ESPN. Many people are moving off of TV providers outright, and except for few news channels to see news. And I feel like there's going to be very few channels that actually survive. And I feel like Fox, NBC, CBS, maybe some of the few that actually do because of their because people are going to still need to see the news even if they have streaming platforms for every other thing that they want to watch. And I feel like the MLB needs to stop worrying about money a little bit and start looking for exposure because that's the only way they're going to grow the game.
Okay, so you would have the MLB take less money to get
Exposure.
on networks like Fox, CBS, and stuff.
Fox, CBS, NBC, just once a week get a game on one of those channels so that more people can see it. Because again, exposure is what the game's really lacking right now, and except for the playoffs, there isn't much on huge uh, uh, networks. And I do think that hinders the game, especially when it's a very long season. And there's a ton of games to put on there, a ton of great games from the very beginning of the season to the very end. And if more during the season uh, were on those big networks, I feel like the game would gain more fans. And I do think that's what the game needs right now, especially as we're in a holdout between the MLBPA and the MLB. Uh, is it needs more exposure, it needs more fans, and the only way to do that is to have more people see the game.
Speaking of exposure, here's my final rule. It's making jerseys easier to buy. It's not just on MLB.com. You maybe make deals with Walmart to have jerseys. Fanatics have their own brand, so you can have off-brand jerseys, but legal off-brand jerseys that work just to grow exposure. So then you see a lot more jerseys around, and they're not so expensive to get at one place. So that's my final rule. So I guess we have completed all our rules. Any final thoughts, Austin?
Nope. I just hope we get a full season. It seems very, very unlikely, but you can always be hopeful.
Yes, you can be hopeful. Yeah, I hope I hope they figure it out. The over under if is 19 minutes. I'd probably take the under because I haven't set my expectations low. So then you really can meet my expectations, and I'm not that disappointed with a lot of stuff in sports stuff. So, uh, though that's my thought. Hopefully they figured it out, and then we get some more spending sprees. Because I think the Yankees uh, will probably spend more once it opens back up.
Braves.
And maybe the Rangers make a few more deal. Yeah, the Braves do have to sign Freddie Freeman. If we can make that rule, if I can make that rule, I would make that a rule. Braves sign Freddie Freeman because he's a homegrown player, and he suffered with the team.
No, the Braves just need to pay him whatever he's asking. That's the Braves. If the Yankees,
well, yes,
the Giants,
Braves.
if the Yankees, Giants, another team sign him, it's not their fault. It's not the league's fault. It's the Braves' fault.
They should just give Freddie whatever he wants, and I'm sure Freddie will make it a team friendly deal. But he does deserve whatever money he wants.
Mm-hmm.
So, final thoughts. Thank you for joining us for part 3, and thank you for listening to Outsiders Opinions.